Welcome to the 1CA podcast. This is your host, Jack Gaines. 1CA is a product of the Civil Affairs Association and brings in people who are current or former military, diplomats, development officers, and field agents to discuss their experiences on ground with the partner nation's people and leadership. Our goal is to inspire anyone interested in working the last 3 feet of foreign relations. To contact the show, email us at capodcasting@gmail.com or look us up on the Civil Affairs Association website at www.civilaffairsassoc.org. I'll have those in the show notes. Welcome back. This is part 2 of the interview with Patrick Alley, founder of Global Witness and author of the books Very Bad People and Terrible Humans. In part 2, we bring in Mariah Yeager from SMA to discuss with Patrick how DoD can partner with NGOs on integrated influence. So let's get started.
A country like the US has vast resources at its disposal. NGOs very rarely do. But what NGOs can do is, whereas the US is probably looking at the whole world all of the time, and in some bits more than others, NGOs are quite specialist usually. When we worked in various places, information of what's on the ground might have equaled what the US had, for all I know. So there's definitely room for exchange.
Awesome. Mariah, thanks for coming on and joining me in this interview.
Thanks, Jack. So in a world of social media and AI, what do you see as the most dangerous disinformation methods and operations?
We've done quite a lot of work on this. And I think what we've seen on platforms like Twitter, Meta, whatever, despite their claims of managing out dangerous content, if you look at some of the most tense elections over the last few years, like in Kenya, in India, in Myanmar, the amount of disinformation and incitement to violence that's out there is really alarming. And what we've done is to sort of pose as advertisers and create an advert, submit it to the moderators of those platforms and see what happens. And in virtually every case we've done it, adverts basically trying to incite people to extreme violence and hate get accepted. I hasten to add, we withdraw them before they go out. So I think, the threat to democracies globally, I think is one of the biggest threats that AI and social media bring. And we'll see it, with Brexit campaign in the UK, the recent general election in the campaign in the UK, and outbreaks of far-right violence across Europe. That's, for me, is the most disturbing thing.
Okay, so Global Witness was founded in 1993. That covers quite an interesting period of technological revolution. And so I'm curious with how did Global Witness make that change? It seems to me that you guys were literally at the forefront of see how this could be useful or hurtful. And I'm curious just how the organization shifted.
I mean, you're quite right. The way we can investigate has changed beyond belief. I sort of quote this figure in the book that when we started, there was something like 1,500 websites in the world. Now there are 1.5 billion. So the way we can get information has changed dramatically. Also, it means covering our tracks is more difficult. You could just print a false business card a few years ago and you'd be all right. But now you have to have a history. But yeah, so for example, we did an investigation shortly about a month after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which showed how Total Energies in France, one of the world's oil majors, one of its refineries in Russia, in Siberia, was supplying gas condensate to a refinery which was converting it into jet fighter fuel, which was supplying bases used to bomb Ukraine. And we were doing that to basically say to foreign oil majors, you shouldn't be there. You should not be working in Russia on these issues. We could not have done that investigation. It was public information, but to actually trawl those databases in the time to be meaningful, the way we disseminate our information, we're much more global than Global Witness was in those early days, just in terms of using social media responsibly. So just that information gathering has changed. And also a silly example, our first secret cameras were in a kind of bag slung over your shoulder, and you sort of said, well, yes, it's a camera, but obviously it's inside the thing. It's not a secret camera. You can have something that no one will ever suspect and is much better quality. It's much easier and safer to do what we do. Another example, looking at the use of anonymously owned companies to carry out money laundering or whatever, we managed to put the whole Companies House website, which is the UK's register of all companies, feed in certain criteria and work out how many people who ran companies were on sanctions lists, dead, age 3 or under, or one guy who was a director of 9,000 companies from a small office in Manchester, and so something's dodgy going on there. So that's stuff you couldn't have done before.
In 1993, printer paper still had the perforated edges.
Well, I didn't know how to use a bloody computer, you know.
There we go. So thank you for that. So talking about publicly available information, what are your thoughts on that burden of proof given the advent of publicly available information, specifically about propagation of false information and the use of deep fakes and generative AI? How have these things changed how we prove atrocities?
From our perspective, our entire credibility relies on our information being good. And not just our credibility, our ability to exist, because we will be sued for defamation quicker than you can flick your fingers if we defame someone saying they did something they didn't do. So we can only publish what we can prove. So we're rigorous about that and making sure we have all the background information. We still use undercover stuff sometimes, so we might have undercover footage of stuff. We will get documentation. Public record is probably more useful or more believable, trustworthy, whatever. So from that perspective, we have to be rigorous or our reputation's shot and we cease to exist and cease to have any influence. In terms of us being fed bad information, which is a risk that we give information to the US government, they need to believe it. Similarly, when we get given information, we need to believe it, which is why we need to do rigorous fact checking. And that costs us an awful lot of time and an awful lot of money, but it's essential to what we do. From when a report probably takes another 4 months to get it out, depending on its length and complexity and how dangerous the opposition is.
That's actually a really good segue into other question about AI and large language models can be used to identify or verify disinformation.
We, as far as I know, haven't actually used AI as yet to do that. But looking more globally at the use of AI, I think it's one of the biggest hurdles we face because it's so good, and deepfake, everything else is so good and it's penetrated everywhere. So I think that's one of the things that we will have to get a lot better at. We're working on it, but we just have to get much, much better at it. But I think this is a challenge for governments, electoral authorities, and everybody right now. So we're not alone in that.
What else do you see in the near term, or even maybe the medium term, of what are the challenges as these type of investigations are going forward?
The challenges in investigations going forward?
Yeah. So in this type of work, what are the challenges that you're seeing on the forefront?
Yeah, well, what Global Witness is mainly focusing on now are issues often related to the climate crisis, which we see as one of the biggest threats on a whole load of levels, whether that's militarily, politically, whatever. And of course, in terms of a planet we can inhabit, that's just a broad thing. And so we work on various different issues. So we're looking at the fossil fuel industry in Ukraine in particular. We're looking at transition minerals in Myanmar, again, critical to the energy transition. And I think, to give one example directly related to your question, is one of the things we've spent a lot of time on is land and environmental defenders. Around 4 people a week, indigenous peoples and others, are killed, usually by industrial activities. That a lot of this is happening in the Amazon, in Mexico and Colombia and across the world. And those people are often the guardians of natural resources, better than governments often prove to be. They're amazing sources of information. They're the kind of the feet on the ground. They're already there, but they're being targeted in what is a genuine shooting war in many countries. Without them, the tropical rainforest will be gone. And I'm not trying to exaggerate that. So I think protecting people like that, we're merely, in a way, a conduit of information. We have our people on the ground, but the people on the ground are the ones we need to protect, and they're very often the victims of what you're talking about with disinformation, physical threat, and a whole range of things.
Thank you. Has Global Witness been targeted with any disinformation by any of its target governments?
Not that I know of. I wouldn't say it hasn't happened, but not that I know of. And we have as yet not published anything which has got a massive pushback saying that was really wrong. But one of our campaigns is on disinformation, as I mentioned earlier. So and we have expert people who are always kind of monitoring that kind of stuff.
So SMA is currently working on a project on integrated deterrence, which is and kind of the latest buzzword. And so, spoiler alert, we've kind of changed it to like, we actually think of it more in terms of integrated influence. You have to look across how you're influencing not just an adversary, but whatever behavior you're trying to change. And then also be able to work across the whole of government and with allies and partners. So Global Witness, the work you've been done has been doing that for a long time. So I'm curious, what would be your recommendations as we really are looking at integrated influence?
Probably sum it up in 3 words, which is follow the money. We didn't use that term, didn't even think about it possibly in that way, but others have said that in 1993, when Global Witness was born and Transparency International was founded, it was the birth of the global anti-corruption movement. So a lot of what Global Witness has done is worked on corruption. And that's not just cash in a brown envelope. It's the corruption of political systems and the corruption of the entire financial sector. And so things that are really important are looking at money laundering. That's how every dirty deal is done. Money laundering requires anonymously owned companies in the US and the EU, not least because our work in Transparency International now in many places have public registries of companies, which is essential. And we used evidence to get that. You've got to sort of create the example. That's what we do. For example, years ago, proving that the natural gas supply from Turkmenistan to Russia and then to Europe, at one point in Ukraine, long before the invasion, was controlled by a company no one knew who owned it. And it was a guy called Dmitry Firtash, we found out, since sanction in post-Ukraine war. So our message was the European gas supply is at the whim of whoever this is. And so I think those messages are really important. I think also the enablers, what we call the pinstripe army of lawyers, real estate agents, company formation agents, who make this whole illicit financial system work. Everything they do looks on the surface as legal. Put it together, and they're basically enabling organized crime and variations thereof. And a spin-off from that, of course, is we and others, both in Europe and the US and elsewhere, we showed how much kleptocrats, oligarchs' money is in New York real estate, London real estate, art collections, car collections. There's no point in being a billionaire in Equatorial Guinea. You want to do it in Monaco. So get your money out and live your luxury life elsewhere. We can close those doors together. And that's kind of going back to your thing about an integrated response. You will never stop corruption. Corruption's at the root of most of this, but you can make it more difficult to do and far more expensive to do.
Because that's an interesting point. Most of the criminal actors or adversary actors that we know, Russian oligarchs or IRGC family, they live in Western Europe. They go and hide their money in Western banks because they know that Russian or PRC banks will just take the money back if that person becomes inconvenient. And so by making it impossible for them to have that membership at the Monaco Yacht Club or have free access in and out of Europe or shut down their houses in London, those kind of actions, they remove the demand signal for these criminal actors from doing the things they do because they're going to end up with a lot of money and nowhere to go with it. And so I thought that was really great point.
It's quite right. And I think, we and Transparency International worked on a particular case back in 2016 where a particular oligarch had £400 million worth of central London property. And that led the exposure of that to the then Prime Minister, David Cameron, saying, okay, he'd create a public registry of companies and close down that avenue. And then Brexit happened. He resigned. No government after that, since 2016 in the UK, would take that forward until the invasion of Ukraine. And then we got the economic crime bill within a very short space of time, and the oligarchs are kicked out of their houses, blah, blah, blah. It could have been done 6 years before, but it wasn't, because there wasn't the political will. Because it's nice to have all of that money swirling around your capital. So those are kind of the challenges we have to get across.
There was another point that I wanted to bring up, and that is protecting investigative journalists, because you had a story about a mafia group in Slovakia, I believe, that killed a couple of journalists. Can you talk a little bit about the need for investigative journalism and how to protect it?
Yeah, certainly. I include the kind of work of organizations like Global Witness under that banner, because we're all investigators or we're journalists. There are some specializations. But yeah, I mean, Slovakia's example is really good because you've got a country which is one of the smallest countries in the EU, but one of its stars, one of its economic stars, and a really big corruption problem. This journalist was killed, Jan Kuciak, and the demonstrations, because of the public anger about corruption, led to the downfall of the government within a very short space of time. So that the prime minister went, the police chief went, loads of judges were sort of caught with compromat and went. And that was local journalists under the auspices, with the support of the Organised Crime, Corruption and Reporting Project, which is an organisation that works with State Department a lot and I respect highly. And they managed to expose this vast depths of corruption. And as one of the journalists put it, what they found proved how cheap it was to buy Slovakia in the context of things. Tragically, people did go to jail for it and whatever. The prime minister who was deposed, whose special advisor was a former Italian topless model with mafia links, Robert Fico, was re-elected just in the last few months. He was the guy who was just survived an assassination attempt a few weeks ago. So he's back. He's pro-Russia, anti-support for Ukraine, and absolutely linked to mafia networks. He's back in power of a leading European country. So it doesn't always go our way.
Well, just because you get a reform happening doesn't mean that the people that are opposed to it don't continue to work.
Well, yeah.
And that's the vigilance that has to happen with anti-corruption reform.
Exactly, yeah.
Who monitors the NGOs for accuracy, disinformation, and bias?
Civil litigation system?
Yeah, I would say that's the most powerful one. There is no government institution that does that any more than they do with journalists. But yes, the threat of defamation, which is known as lawfare, because it's abused terribly. If you start publishing information on an oligarch, then they will come after you. And the UK is one of the worst places in the world to be come after because the system is so rigged against the publishers of information. And so they could close us down. They could close us down even if we are right, except we have to be very rigorous in fact-checking, going through a series of libel lawyers to make sure what we are saying is as libel-proof as it can be. But if it isn't, we will go down. Undoubtedly, we're against powerful adversaries. That money's no object. It's the easiest thing for them to do. So that's our check and balance. And Global Witness spends probably upwards of £400,000, £600,000 a year just to prevent those cases coming up. If the cases came up, you're into multi-million-dollar territory just like that.
I think the second half of that would be having the connections with governments and officials and the media so that as you're campaigning in the court, you're also campaigning politically and publicly so that you build support for your cause.
Yeah, that's right. But, governments can't stop the court cases. And there are two cases over the last couple of years in the UK, very high profile. One, a guy called Tom Burgess, who wrote a book about Abramovich, mostly one of the key oligarchs. And he was sued for, I can't remember, talking tens, if not hundreds of millions. And another journalist called Carol Kulwada, who wrote about Russian funding of the Brexit campaign, the Leave campaign. Those cases were lost by the plaintiffs, but not without an awful lot of stress and heartache. And so the bad guys, the very bad people in my book, are the ones who are trying to shut up people who are trying to speak the truth.
You wrote Very Bad People, 2022. Terrible Humans is coming out here in August. So as you're looking into basically the depths of depravity that are possible in humans, was there anything that surprised you or Terrible Humans or in putting the book together?
I think I surprised anyone bought books, but no. Very Bad People was essentially 8 stories from Global Witness's casebook. It was not a memoir, and my agent said, write it like a TV series, so I did. These chapters, an episode. And I think there were no surprises for me in that because I was involved in most the stuff there. I think what was really nice was to be able to review for the first time what we'd done, because we never had done. We've never been navel gazing, as we call it, what do we do, So it was nice to be able to do that. I think with Terrible Humans, that's when I wrote just over half the stories in other organizations and stories I either didn't know well or didn't know at all. And I guess not necessarily surprised, but so impressed by the skill and dedication and courage of the people doing that work and how similar we all found the problems to be. The difficulty of getting information or to publishing the information but also the support that we did get from various people, including within governments. So, yeah, I think it was just nice to look back on one level and then to appreciate how many good people are out there and how they really do need, that cooperation to help them do what they do.
Okay, I'm going to close out, but I wanted to bring up one point for the audience, and that is, as you are looking for something beyond work or retirement, and you're looking for a cause, these NGOs like Global Witness and Global Integrity, O-Corp, Sea Shepherd, they are great organizations that could use people with analytical skills, with coordination skills to support the causes that they do.
Well, I really appreciate being asked, and I hope I haven't brought anyone sideways.
So I appreciate it.
Really appreciate having you on today.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you get a chance, please like and subscribe and rate the show on your favorite podcast platform. Also, if you're interested in coming on the show or hosting an episode, email us at capodcasting@gmail.com. I'll have the email and CA Association website in the show notes. And now, most importantly, to those currently out in the field, working with a partner nation's people or leadership to forward U.S. relations, thank you all for what you're doing. This is Jack. Stay tuned for more great episodes. 1CA Podcast.